I told her I'm not supposed to work on the Lord's Day. Says he don't mind. So I'll be doing something this afternoon and tomorrow, getting work done around the house that needs to be done. The title of my message, of course, if you've already got the outline that I leave out here each Sunday morning, this title of this one is Just Do It. Just do it. Remember the old Nike swoosh? Just do it. Just do it. Well, that came out of the Old Testament, and we'll talk about that a little bit here this morning, long before Nike was ever around, long before this United States was ever around. It's important not to sleep when there's something important to hear, but it's also important not to sleep when there's something important to do. And I thought about that, and I thought about a president in the United States that we had one time that did just that. He did nothing. You probably don't even remember his name unless you remember your early history, American history. The president that I'm referring to is David Rice Atchison. Now, who was he? Well, the president was President-to-be was Zachary Taylor, and Zachary Taylor was supposed to be sworn in, and it was Sunday, and he told him, he says, I will not be sworn into office as the new president of the United States on the Lord's Day. And they said, okay. Well, James Polk was the president, but he had already left. He had already left Washington on Friday. He had taken off to go home and be with his family and so on. And George Gallas was the vice president. He was already gone. And the senior citizen from the state of Missouri is called David Rice Atchison. He was sworn in to be the president of the United States for one day. One day. Okay? Now, for this one day, after that, some weeks later, people were talking to him, says, Mr. President, what did you do during your time in office? He says, I went to sleep. And they asked him, would you explain that? He says, yeah. He says, as a senator, I've been working hard day and late into the evenings, and I would just give out, and I was just tired, so I did the only thing I knew to do. I went to sleep. He slept through his administration. And he went on to say, I had the most honest administration in the history of the United States for that one day that he slept through it. Sleeping through something that's important. We have an Old Testament story about David and Saul and Jonathan. Let's take our Bibles this morning and turn in the Old Testament to the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. And the 14th chapter, we're going to be reading there in just a second. But let me kind of give you the context of where we're at on this service here today. Saul had been made king over Israel. This was not God's desire. God wanted a theocracy. God was to rule the nation through his prophets and so on. But the people says, we want a king like the other nations around us. And he told them of what it was going to cost them as a nation, that they're going to have to give up their young men and women, their portion of their income is going to have to go to the government, support all of these different things. But we want a king. And they inaugurated Saul as the first king of Israel. He inherited an awful foreign policy, and the problem was at that time was the Philistines. The Philistines occupied the land, and they pretty well controlled the land. They controlled it to the point that the Israelites were not allowed to have swords, were not allowed to have spears. If an Israelite wanted his plow sharpened, he had to go to one of the blacksmiths that were, all blacksmith shops were run by the Philistines. And if you wanted anything done, it required that of a nature. And so here Saul and Jonathan are the only two people in all of Israel here, as you read 1 Samuel, that had a sword. They had a sword. What are you going to do against, hundreds and hundreds of Philistines that are out there? Well, what happened was that Jonathan was given a group of soldiers that he was to be over, and he decided there's a camp over here, a garrison of Philistines. Let's go and attack them. Well, he's the only one that has a sword, so they go and attack and kill about 30 of them in a space of about an acre of ground. Wow, that really, when the word got back to all the rest of the Philistines, they were so angry, they gathered up their big army together and says, we're going to go and we're going to annihilate those Israelites. And so they gather their army and they're coming to fight Israel. In the meantime, Saul, the newly appointed king, he gathers up his army, what remnants was about 600, and he's seated here, or sitting in a valley, and of this tall mountain that's here with the peaks and things to it, and he's sitting underneath a pomegranate tree, doing nothing. He wasn't going to do nothing. He's thinking to himself, how could I do anything with one sword for me and one sword for Jonathan against all of those Philistines? And so we pick it up here in the 14th chapter of the book of 1 Samuel, verse number 1. Now it happened one day that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let's go over to the Philistine garrison, a garrison that is on the other side. But he did not tell his father. Jonathan had it up to here. Jonathan says, I'm not going to be a do-nothing. I'm going to do something even if it turns out wrong. I can't just sit here and wait for the Philistines to call all of the shots. He says, so he said to his armor bearer, don't tell my dad, because Saul would have put a stop to it. You're not going to go fight the Philistines. But he's told that armor bearer, come on, let's go. And we pick it up again in verse number 6. Then Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let's go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few. So his armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart. Go then, here I am with you according to your heart. And then Jonathan said, very well, let's cross over to these men and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, come up here to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this will be a sign for us. So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, look, the Hebrews are coming out of their holes where they've hidden. The men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up here to us, and we will show you something. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel. Here it is, Philistines, it's at the top of a mountain, and they're on one side, and it's a very strategic point that is there, and Israel is down in the valley. There's no way you're going to climb up that mountain without the Philistines seeing it. So Jonathan says to his armor bearer, do you really want to do this with? I can't sit still and do nothing. I'm like that Nike swoosh. Just do it, even if it's wrong. Just do it. Got to do something. And so here it is, says, put his armor bearer, took and put the sword on the armor bearer's back, and they climbing up this hill up to the garrison that's there situated at the top. And as they're crawling hands and knees up there, they stand up, and those Philistines up there, all right, guys, come on up. We're going to show you something. Well, that was a sign that he got from God, that if they tell us to come up here, then God will fight for us. And so they got up, and they went up, and they destroyed that entire garrison of the Philistines that were there. Now, let's pick up reading in verse 13. And Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan as he came after him. His armor bearer killed them. The first slaughter with Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within about half an acre of land. And there was trembling in the camp, in the field, and among the people. The garrison and its raiders also trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it was very great trembling. Here it is. They went up, and they says, well, we don't know if God's going to fight for us or not, but we're going to go up anyway. We're going to do it. Just do it. And so they come, and then God is on their side. The ground didn't quake in the earthquake before they went up and fought, but quaked after they did. So to take care of the rest of the Philistines that were there. It says, now the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and there was a multitude melting away, and they went here and there. Then Saul said to the people who were with him, now call the roll and see who has gone from us. And when they had called the roll, surprisingly, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. And Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark of God. For at that time the ark of God was with the children of Israel. And now it happened while Saul talked to the priest that the noise which was in the camp of the Philistines continued to increase. And Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Then Saul and all of the people who were with him assembled, and they went into battle. And indeed, every man's sword was against his neighbor, and there was a great confusion. Moreover, the Hebrews who were with the Philistines before that time, who went up with them into the camp from the surrounding country, they also joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, the men of Israel who had hidden in the mountains of Ephraim, when they heard the Philistines fled, they also followed hard after them in battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle shifted to Beth-aven. What it was before, they saw the situation, a lot of the Israelites, and so some of them even defected, went over to the enemy side. They're fighting now with the Philistines. They're fighting with the Philistines. But when they saw what Israel was doing and that God was with Israel, they turned around and began to fight the Philistines themselves. And there was a great battle, and God gave them the victory that was there. You know, this story tells me a lot of important things. Most basic is that maybe God is wanting us to do something. For too long, people have occupied a safe position in the church. They sat still instead of saying, let's do it. Let's do something even if it doesn't turn out the way that we want it to turn out. Let's do it, and let's do our part and let God write the ending of the story. I've had to do that a lot in my life. Go forth and let God, you write the ending of the story. I know what I'd like for it to be, but it's got to be what you want it to be. So you write the end of the story. We have a lot of people, we call it sideliners. In ball games yesterday, if you were like me, you watched several of those football games, and this is my time of year, and I enjoy football. So my wife knows that, so she just leaves me alone in the living room in my old easy chair, and I sit back and watch football to my heart's content, because there are a lot of different games on yesterday, but I understand football. But I'm always amazed when you watch a football game, how many people up in the stands think they know better than the coach does down on the field, because you hear them yelling and hollering things and mooing and doing this and that and second guessing the coaches and things. And you hear a lot of people criticizing up there. It's always easy to criticize. I saw some figures one time that says probably at every football game there are at least 80 people in the stands that are critics are criticizing what's going on. He shouldn't have done this play. He shouldn't have run this. He should have thrown. He should come up with all sorts of criticism. It's easy to criticize. But when you're doing something that the Lord has led you to do, you leave that criticism behind. You said, I'm doing this, and if God is in it, God will bless it. And that's where it is. We have to get off the sideline. Sometimes we have to knock on the door. Knock on that door. Remember Paul in Acts the 16th chapter? He's wanting to go to Asia. And he goes to that door, and that door knocks on it. The door doesn't open for him. He says, well, if I can't go to Asia, I'll go over here to Bithynia. And he goes over and he knocks on that door. Nothing happened. So he turns around and says, I'll go this way to Troas. And he went to Troas and he knocked on that door, and God opened that door, and the gospel of Jesus Christ came to all of Europe because he didn't quit. He didn't stop. He didn't stop when God didn't open the door at Asia. He didn't say, well, I'm just going to sit here until God opens the door. I've had a lot of people tell me that. I'm not going to move until I know that this is exactly what God wants me to do. And God will open the door and he'll make it known to me. Well, he didn't to Paul. Paul thought, well, if God, you don't want me to go to Asia, I'll go over here to Bithynia. God didn't open that door either. He says, well, I'll go over here. And he didn't stop. He knocked on the door of Troas. And because of that, we have the gospel that goes all out to all of Europe. They knew what God's desire was for their nation. They didn't have to wait for some special envoy to come from God with instructions as to what they're supposed to do. Back in 1 Samuel, the 7th chapter, he had already told him. Let me read that verse. 1 Samuel 7:3 says, and Samuel said to the house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths, and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. God already told him what he's going to do. If you do these things, I'm going to do this. They didn't have to wait to get a special sign from God to know what to do and how to do it. We already have the orders. Jonathan says, we got the orders. Excuse me. We know what we got to do. And so Jonathan says, I'm going to do it. I've got that just do it spirit. I'm not going to step back. I don't know if any of you have read the book. The title of the book is The Fall of the Fortresses. It's about World War II and the B-17 bombers that flew out of England and flew over and did bombing raids on Germany. One particular aircraft is called Tondaleo. Flew out of England, goes over to Germany, and is flying over Kassel, Germany, and it took anti-aircraft hits from down on the ground, which was not uncommon. But what was uncommon was one of the shells, he looked out his window, Captain Fox did, and so had penetrated the gas tank. And they knew that, oh no, this is going to blow us out of the sky. This is it for us. But they continued on, finished their mission, and came back and landed safely in England. And then after they landed the plane, the people from the Air Force came out and started checking it over. And it says, you got hit by anti-aircraft fire this time. Well, you're always getting hit by. He says, yeah, but it got my gas tanks this time. And so they took the gas tank off, and they were examining. He says, you didn't get hit once in the gas tank. You got hit 11 times. 11 20 millimeter shells penetrated your gas tank. You should have been blown out of the sky. Blown out of the sky. It just stopped his heart. He couldn't believe that. He says, well, let's take these shells to the armory and let's let them defuse them. When they took them to the armory to defuse those 11 shells, as they got them out of the gas tank, they found out that each one of them, there was no striking device in it, no igniting device. They had left the igniting devices out of those 11 shells. In one, they found a little piece of paper, and there was a note written on that paper in Czechoslovakian. And so they found an interpreter on post and asked him to interpret what that note said that was inside of that shell that didn't explode there in this gas tank. And this is what it says: "This is all that we can do for now." This is all that we can do for now. What had happened was that the Germans had invaded Czechoslovakia and enslaved those people. And many of them were having to work in the munitions factories and things for Germany. And instead of just taking a defeatist attitude, saying, "We can't do anything. We're prisoners of war. We're working here in this munitions factory, preparing this ammunition for the Germans," they said, "No, what we can do, it's all we can do for right now. Let's leave the ignition devices out of these shells, and then they won't explode." That was a can-do attitude. We can't do everything, but we can do something for that. Martin Luther had a can-do attitude. They asked Martin Luther once, "Martin, if you knew that the world was going to end tomorrow, for sure, what would you do today?" Now, you ask yourself, what would we do? What would we do if I knew exactly that tomorrow the world was going to end? He thought for a minute. He says, "Well, what I would do today is I'd plant an apple tree." He says, "You do what?" He says, "I'd plant an apple tree." And he says, "Why would you do that?" He says, "It's not up to me to determine whether or not this what God wants." He says, "I will plant an apple tree, then explain he had no use for speculation on what might happen in the world tomorrow. God put him here to do something good in the world today. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but God put us here in the world to do something good today." The world could end tomorrow, and does. The world does end every day for some people, you know. I'm going to cover those three questions quickly on your outline. First question is, are you willing to do something that's right even if it turns out wrong? You know. He said, "Come over and to the outpost, these uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf." He didn't know whether the Lord was going to help him out or not, Jonathan and his armor bearer. He just said, "Let's climb, let's do it." We don't know, but God did, you know. Jonathan's spirit was, "I would rather fail at doing something great for God than to succeed in doing nothing." Let me read that again. "I would rather fail attempting something great for God than to succeed in doing nothing." He had that can-do attitude. Most people want a map, but God doesn't give a map. He only gives a compass. He says, "You go in this direction, you do this." And God says, "And I'll write the end of the story. I'll write the end of the story." I used to preach, and I think it was a mistake, that the safest place to be is in the middle of God's will. And I thought, no, that's not a safe place. That's where Jesus was, and he got crucified. He was in the middle of God's will, but he was doing what God wanted him to do. And sometimes that's exactly what we need to do. I don't know if you're familiar with the William Borden story. He was of the Borden estate. He was a millionaire when he graduated from high school. Excuse me. And so he's getting ready to go to college. And he took his Bible, and on the front cover of his Bible on a fly page, he wrote, "No reserve, no reserves." And he went to college. He went to Yale University and graduated with honors. And when he graduated, all sorts of big companies and firms and things was trying to hire him to work for them. And he said, "No." He says, "I'm not going to work for you. I'm going to be a missionary. I'm going to be a missionary." Because his father, as a graduation present from high school, had given him a missions trip to go around the world. And he said when he was there in Egypt and he saw those Muslims in Egypt, he says, "I want to be a missionary back for them." So graduated from Yale, and then he went on to Princeton, to seminary in Princeton. And he graduated from Princeton, and he gets on a ship and goes to Cairo there in Egypt. He's there in his missionary capacity, and he writes in his Bible, "No retreats," and then he writes, "No regrets." After he was there 1 month, he contracted spinal meningitis, and he died. 1 month. His grave is still there in Cairo today. If you take those tours and things, you'll go by his grave. They'll show you William Borden's grave that is there. But that was his thing. No reserve, no retreats, and no regrets. I think the deepest regrets that I deal with in my line of work is people who didn't do anything. It's not so much what we keep ourselves from, but it's what we commit ourselves to. We don't do this and this and this. That's great. But what have you committed yourself to do, even if it turns out wrong? Second, are you willing to do something that will fail unless God is in it? Nothing can hinder saving, whether by many or by few. I've learned this about vision. You can have a vision, but most people, before they have vision, want to know the provision. How are we going to do this? And we get it all lined up and do this. And once we got it all worked out, then we say, now that I've got the provision, I will have the vision. God says, you get the vision and I'll supply the provision. I'll supply how it's going to work. I never have known how I was going to do things in life, but I got the vision that God wants me to do something, and I do that. And God works out the rest of it. Sir Wilford Granville was a medical missionary to Labrador, and he was out seal hunting, and he was on this ice floe, and somehow it became detached from land, and it was starting to float out into the Arctic Ocean. He knew that this is serious. This is bad serious. All he had with him was his dogs. He took and mercifully killed his dogs and skinned them and took their skins and made himself a coat. And he put up a flag on the ice floe that he was on, and he laid down and he went to sleep. When he was rescued, they asked him about it. He says, I did all that I could do. There was nothing more. Now it's not me. Now it's up to God, doing all that we can do. Lastly, are you willing to do something that will bring out the best in others? Bring out the best in others. It's like I would want to say a jet that goes real fast, and behind it, it sucks up everything behind it. It flies that way. It isn't the push of the power of the engines. It's the lift above the wings that makes an airplane fly through the air. It's not this down here, and it's not this down here. It's the round circling of the air. That's why I have those avions that lift up that airplane into the air. And that's because it's going fast. It's pulling things up. And that's what we need to do. I know the Olympics are next year, and I'm excited about that. But I remember back in 1988, they had the Olympics over in Seoul, South Korea. And a young pre-law student by the name of Arlene Dumas won the gold medal in Taekwondo. And they were having the medal presentation and had to stand all here, and she was up to receive the medal, and they got ready to play the national anthem of the country, which was the United States, for this medal. And they started, and something went wrong with the tape machine, and there's an awkward silence. You know how that is. Well, somebody do something. Something's got to happen. So she walked over to a microphone and she began to sing, "Oh, say, can you see?" Pretty soon, people over here and people over there, people in the stands that were there joined in with, and they sang our national anthem. She knew that you've got to do something. You've got to do it. Just do it. Don't worry about how it's going to turn out. People are going to say, "Oh, that wasn't good," or anything like that. Just do it. And she did it. I think God would perform a whole lot more miracles if we just gave him material to perform those miracles. He wants to do things in our lives, but we got to give him the opportunity to do those things. And I want to close with this. It's a true story. It comes out of New York City. Two guys went out and got drunk. They were roommates. And they had a big time on the town that night and came back home. And they were in the den of their house. The two of them lived together as friends. They're in New York City. And so they made a bet. It says, who do you think would sit still the longest if this place caught on fire? Or who would be the first one to get up and leave? Let's see. I bet you I'll sit here the longest.